prices are the lowest they have ever been. And getting the right SSD for your workflow, not choosing the wrong one, might be a little bit complicated or a little bit confusing because there are so many different versions out there. For example, in your workflow, you might want to choose this one but not this one, or this one instead of that one. It all depends what are you doing with the SSD. So in this video, I'm going to be showing which are the best SSDs for creators and which one should you be choosing when you want to be on a budget as well. Because last year I did find some very interesting dark horses that I didn't know before and were actually performing very, very well.
Looking for a cheap way to license your Windows? Check out Whokeys through the links in the video description. Make sure to use the code TN20 to get a 30% off. Paste the license to the activation settings and you're all done. This license is for Windows 10, but you can upgrade it to Windows 11 for free. They also offer Microsoft Office 19 license. Use the same code TN20 to get a 30% off. Check out whokeys.com in the video description below.
So two quick things first. If you're looking for an external SSD solution, for example, for Mac or for your laptop, then I highly recommend checking out my external SSD guide, where we're going to go a little bit deeper into the external solutions and which one should you choose and how does that work. So go check that one out. Also, all of the SSDs that I'm recommending are going to be linked in the description below if you want to pick any of these up. So the first tip I would have for you is, instead of actually choosing the old-fashioned SATA SSDs, which always have been recommended and are still loads of them around on the market, you might want to stay away from these, depending on your use case, of course, but these actually aren't the cheapest anymore. And if you do have the M.2 slots on your motherboard, going with the M.2 SSD like one of these is going to be much faster and oftentimes even cheaper. Because these SATA SSDs, they seem to be sometimes more expensive. Obviously, once you've filled all the M.2 on your motherboard, having a SATA SSD for extra SSD storage is good as well. But these SATA SSDs are going to go up to 600 megabytes per second, whereas these M.2 SSDs go up to 10,000. So that's 20 times faster than some of these. So let's take a look at some of the benchmarks. First of all, we want to look at sequential read and write speed. So this is basically the synthetic and theoretical maximum read or write speed of these SSDs. And in these benchmarks that are coming up, I also have different sizes of the same SSD. For example, highly recommend keeping your eye on the Lexar NM790 that I have the 1, 2, and 4 terabyte version. And some of the other ones I have different ones as well. For example, the NetAC, I have 2 separate sizes in there as well. So that will also showcase in which workflows, like do you actually need a higher end or higher capacity SSD, because sometimes you might get more performance, but not always. So in sequential read speeds, here we can see that the Gen 5 drives like the ADATA Legend 970 and Corsair MP7000, they are on another level, a lot faster than we have on the Gen 4, which now is actually very, very cheap. So you can see Gen 4 kind of caps out around 7.1, 7.2 gigabytes per second, something around there. And a lot of the high-end drives can reach that, as you can see, pretty much from the 3rd place to all the way to Samsung 980 Pro. They are very, very similar and pretty much the same. So the marketing aspect is going to be the most important there, because they want to put on the box the fastest. So read speeds up to 7,450 megabytes per second there, but very likely you might not be getting them and they all perform sequentially the same. But that is not the most important spec at all. And then further down, you can see that the Cardia Z440 and Sabrent Rocket 4.0, which are actually like first generation of Gen 4 drives, a little bit older, but they have something very important about them, which might actually makes you consider those over the other ones in here. We'll talk about that in a minute. And then the Solidigm P41 Pros, they're kind of like the mid-range Gen 4 drives, which you can see over there. The interesting thing is I also have Samsung T9 in there, which is an external SSD that you can see in there. And then on the bottom, you can see the Samsung 980, which is a Gen 3 last generation drive. Next, let's take a look at the write speed. Sequential write speed theoretical like maximum of that, and we're taking another look at Crystal Diskmark here, and you can see again the Gen 5 drives perform a lot faster. Interestingly, the Corsair MP7000 is about 14% slower than the Adata Legend 970, and here you can see that even different Gen 5 drives have different capabilities. It doesn't just mean that the Gen 5 are all like in new bag than the Gen 4 drives. Then most of the high-end Gen 4 drives, they perform very similarly, some a little bit lower, some a little bit less, but then you can see that the Cardia from about NetAC NV7000T below, and then they start to lower down a little bit, and then we have the mid-range Gen 4 drives, and then Gen 3 in the very bottom there. We're gonna move on to PCMark 10 Quick System Benchmark. And this benchmark tests all of the drives in a quick little task that you might be doing every single day. Opening documents, closing documents, browsing, like little bits, not sequential reader, not heavy on the SSD, but reading little bits of data all over the place. And the drives that perform well in this test are very good for a secondary drive. So perhaps you're just looking to expand your storage and you're doing it on a laptop or on a PC, and you just want a little bit more capacity where you're looking at photos or playing back video. You just have something there as a secondary drive. It's not very demanding. Here are some of the best options. Obviously, the Gen 5 drives, again, perform very similarly right on the top of the chart. Then we have Solidigm P44 Pro, which is one of my favorite finds in 2023. They are absolutely fantastic drives. They're often much cheaper than the Samsung 990 Pro and actually a little bit faster. They have better terabyte written spec as well, which we'll mention later on in the video. But Samsung 990 Pro and Solidigm P44 Pro 1TB and 2TB are very good. As you can see here, having a larger capacity like the P44 Pro 1TB and 2TB, the 2TB version performs better. But interestingly, the Kingston Fury Renegade 1TB version versus the KC3000 4TB version, they're very similarly priced and similarly spec'd SSDs. We can't see any performance difference in 1 and 4 capacities. But I'd say most of these drives are very good for what you're going to be doing, and if you're just having a secondary SSD, any one of these. I'd say probably the higher end ones from about Lexer NM800 Pro and above, they're a little bit of an overkill if you just want extra little bit of storage in there, and even the SATA SSDs at that point would be fine. Moving on to PCMark 10 Data Benchmark. And this tests the drives as a data storage. So perhaps you're not so actively working on them, but more like storing on them. And it's not testing the drives as an applications or active programs working on it. So just kind of like a storage or data drive, as the benchmark name suggests. And here we can see again the Gen 5 drives right on the top there, and Samsung 990 Pro as the best one, second place on Gen 4, if we'd say that, and then Solidigm P44 Pro again right on the top there. Interestingly, quite a bit faster than the FireQ 530 or Kingston Fury Renegade or KC3000, which are also very high-end Gen 4 drives. The Cardia A440 again, like in the secondary high-end bunch there with the rest of the Gen 4 drives. And you can see we're slightly going a little bit lower there. I'd like to say that interestingly, the Solidigm P41 Plus, which is here, one of those very affordable mid-range Gen 4 drives, performs very well in a lot of those tests. So the Solidigm SSDs I'm very fond of. Bear in mind, some of these drives that you can see on the table here, these aren't even all of the drives that you can see tested over there, and some of these I haven't tested exactly, like the T-Create here. This is actually Gen 3 drive, but they're for another project, so this is kind of like a visual representation. But in there we have a lot more drives on the table. Some of these are still in the PCs or already in use somewhere else. But here are some of the results if you want to compare certain drives to the other one. In the data drive here, where we'd expect larger capacities to perform better, if we look at the Lexer NM790, then the 1TB version is quite a bit higher than the 4TB version and 2TB version. For some reason, the 2TB version is the lowest. Then we have the 4TB version, which is a little bit faster, but then the 1TB version is the fastest. The Samsung T9 here is another one of those drives that you might want to keep an eye on, just showcasing if you had something externally, what would be the performance difference. Always having an internal SSD is going to be much better than having an external SSD. Now moving on to the full system drive benchmark from PCMark 10. And this is one of the very important tests for most of the creators out there. Because if you don't know what your storage workflow should be like, I've got a full dedicated video on the channel. Go check that one out where we go a little bit deeper. What is a project drive? What is an archive drive? What's an OS drive? What is a cache drive? And how you should be labeling them for the most optimized workflow. But in this benchmark here, the full system drive benchmark actually tests the drives as an operating system or running more demanding programs on it. So drives that do well in this test are good for OS or project drive. But the project drives, I'd put a little bit of an asterisk in there because there's the next benchmark that is very important for the project drive as well. If you are using a lot of large assets like big video files and constantly writing and reading files from the drive, you might want to consider also terabyte written spec and the consistency test, which are going to come up next. But if you're looking for the OS drive and project drive, this test is showcasing which ones are the best for you. And surprise, surprise, the Gen 5 drives are quite a bit better than the Gen 4 drives. But the Solidigm P44 Pro 1TB and 2TB version are actually quite marginally faster than the Samsung 990 Pro. So if you're looking at the best OS drive that you can get at very affordable prices, I'd highly recommend checking out Solidigm P44 Pro 1TB and 2TB version because it's absolutely amazing results there. The Samsung is a very solid option as well, but the Samsung has a slightly lower terabyte written spec, but in some of the consistency test actually performs better, so I'll talk about that in a minute. Then we can see that the Kingston Fury Renegade and KC3000 right on the top there as well with FireQ to 530, they are very, very good there. Interestingly, the Lexar NM790 there are very, very good, even though they use a host memory buffer kind of caching on the SSDs compared to some of the other ones that have DRAM cache on Solidigm or Samsung 990 Pro, for example. Now, another drive that I need to mention is the Solidigm P41 Plus drive, because even though being quite a budget drive, as you can see, it is performing better than the Lexar NM790, even though being a little bit cheaper, and very, very close to the top end there with like the FireQ to 530. So if you're looking to save some cash, the P41 Plus is a great option. And also interestingly, here you can see in this test how far we have come from the Samsung 980 Pro. That is very well-known drive and everyone recommends this as the drive, but you can see a lot of the drives can be faster and better than the 980 Pro, and you can see how the kind of first generation Gen 4 drives are actually slowing down a little bit, and the second generation with better controllers and better caching and better, optimization of the hardware, we can get a bit more performance out of the SSDs. Then on the bottom you can see Sabre and Rocket 4.0 and Kadia Z4 41TB drives. So for productivity and video editing or OS drive, these are some of the best drives that you can choose from. Next is the PC Mark 10 consistency test, and this is a very, very synthetic and very demanding test on the SSDs. We're filling the capacity of the drive about 3 times up and down. We're writing over 23 terabytes of files during this test, and the test runs between 10 to 20 hours, very high demanding like read and write speeds of the drive. And this really showcases how well does the drive perform in very long, consistent, heavy use, and does it still perform well after that. So having this result in combination with the previous result of the OS drive, if you have large assets and you're constantly using very demanding tasks, and that is really 0.01% people out there, then this is one of the good options to see which drives are the best. And you can see that the KC3000 4TB drive is actually faster than some of the Gen 5 drives, which is absolutely insane. That just showcases that the KC3000 is an incredible drive to get for consistent read and write speeds, and the control and the caching on there works really well. Another thing that I have noticed in this test is that when you have a larger capacity drive, it usually performs better. Unless you are using a host memory buffer, because I can see that the Lexar NM790, that doesn't do that. 1TB drive performs better than the 4TB drive, which is slightly confusing. But regardless, having a larger capacity drive usually means that you have larger cache, which means when you're working with larger files, it's a bit easier to push the drives in there because there's a lot more space and it is faster. Then on the top we have the Samsung 990 Pro and the FireQuda 530. And you can see that the 990 Pro is another level and really sustains its speeds very, very well out of the Gen 4 drives. And the FireQuda 530, again, very, very consistent and really awesome drive in that type of test. Then we can see that the Verbatim 980 Pro and P44 Pro from Solidigm, they're kind of like really very, very similar there on top of the range, which the Verbatim VI 7000G is a very surprising result in there for doing that. I would have expected some of the other drives to perform a lot faster, but that's interesting. And then we slightly working our way down all the way there. And here you can see if you have the Solidigm P41 Plus, the 2TB drive or 1TB drive, you can see that the size difference makes quite a big difference there in terms of capacity. But also if you have a mid-range Gen 4 drive, you can see how it can't quite keep up if you don't have DRAM cache. So the DRAM drives that have DRAM caching perform a lot better in this test than the DRAM-less drives. And the last very important spec that not a lot of people talk about for creators is the terabyte written spec. Now, terabytes written, TBW, means how many times can you write things on the SSD and then the SSD life is gone. Because SSD consists of little cells that you can fill, and these are like data cells, and you can actually fill the cell and empty the cell only a certain amount of times before the SSD just goes kaboom and look, we're done. And you might lose either the capacity of the drive or it might be unreliable. But often you can see SSDs rated for a 5-year warranty, also with a terabyte written spec. So it's basically when you go to a car manufacturer, they will say that we will warranty your car for 60,000 miles or 5 years or 7 years for Kia or something like that. And that just shows how much confidence they have in the drive performing well even after 5 years. So the industry standard, what Samsung has set and what you see Western Digital and some of the others set out there, is 600 terabytes per 1 terabyte over the 5 years. Which means that roughly you can write about 30% of the drive every single day for the next 5 years, and that's kind of the warranty spec. If you go above that, so for example, if you're using the Samsung 980 Pro or 990 Pro, so these ones here, if you are writing more than 300 gigabytes every single day on it, let's say you do a lot of shoots and you know, project files are 400, 500 gigabytes and you do that every single day, then perhaps this is not the best drive for you because it doesn't support that as much. There are some drives that are a lot higher than that. And you can see here that one of the lowest ones that I wouldn't recommend here is the Verbatim VI 7000G, which for the 2 terabyte drive only offers 700 terabyte written spec, which is very, very low. Now, Samsung 980 Pro and 990 Pro are the 600 standard, and bear in mind, if you go up in the spec for 2 terabyte drive, then usually that doubles as well. So 30% of 2 terabytes is actually 600 something gigabytes. Then the second layer of drives are the NetAC NV7000 and Cardia and Corsair MP700 and a Data Legend 970 as well. So the Gen 5 drives and Solidigm P44 Pro, which actually offers 750 or more than 600 terabytes written per 1 terabyte. Now, bear in mind, sometimes the 2 terabytes doesn't double it from the 1 terabyte. For example, Solidigm P44 Pro is only 1200 for the 2 terabyte one, but 750 for the 1 terabyte one, which is just mostly marketing because it should double with the 2 terabyte version. Then the KC3000 from Kingston is on another level at 800 terabytes written per 1 terabyte. The Lexer NM790 is 1000 terabytes written per 1 terabyte, but doesn't double it for the 2 terabytes and goes to 1500 for the 2 terabytes, but still mighty impressive compared to others, almost double what Samsung offers. The FireQuda 530 now offers quite a bit more, 1275 terabytes written per 1 terabyte, and that doubles per capacity. So if you go higher, it, you know, scales well in there. If you're using a project drive and if you're looking for a project drive, remember the consistency test. The FireQuda 530 performed very, very well up there. And this drive, you can write 70 around 70% of the drive every single day, so 700 something gigabytes every single day for the next 5 years, and that's going to be fine, which is very, very nice. Now, remember I mentioned the Sabrent Rocket and Cardia Z440, which I have in here. These drives here are on another level, and that is 1,800 terabytes written per 1 terabyte and double them for 2 terabytes. That means that for the next 5 years, you can fill the drive to like 95%. So pretty much fill the drive every single day for the next 5 years and you're going to be fine, which is very, very impressive spec. And if you're using a lot of big files, very demanding, consistent workflow for like larger files, then perhaps the Z440 from Team Group Cardia or the Sabrent Rocket 4.0, not the 4.0 Plus because they've lowered the spec for that one, but the 4.0 are the drives for you because that spec is very impressive. It's very hard to test the terabyte written spec, but this is what we have to trust from the manufacturing, what they have tested, but I don't think any reviewers can actually test the drive like that. But I think it's a very important spec to consider for creators. In conclusion, do you only recommend the M.2 SSDs? And I'd say not really, depending on your workflow and what you're wanting. A cache drive. Cache drive is also one of those that I'd recommend, like look at the OS drive benchmarks, because that will also show a lot of random read and write speeds, what we need to like read from, and the Solidigm P44 Pro and Samsung 990 Pro are very good drives in that. But let's say you have filled all of your M.2 SSDs and you still have some SATA ports left, then I think it's worth considering some of the SATA SSDs, 2.5-inch SSDs, because for extra storage or something like that, extra project drives, using SATA is completely fine as well. Or if you want to build yourself a NAS or something like that, that's also a very good option. So I'm gonna leave the SSDs that I mentioned here in the description below, but some of the favorites that I've found in this is the Kingston KC3000. If you're like very consistent project drive, that's very good for project drive. Firecrude are very good for project drive as well. The Samsung 990 Pro is very good for project drive. Now, the one thing that I'd say actually probably avoid, interestingly, is the Gen 5 drives for now. Just because the platforms that we have, when you're using Gen 5 drives, unless you're on the Ryzen platform, you might be losing some of the other features, and I don't think it's worth it right now for the price you'd be paying and for the other features that you might be losing. So perhaps wait with the Gen 5 drives a little bit to come down in pricing and get a little bit better. Right now, the good options are for the Gen 4, even in 2024. Tip number 2 is don't buy a heatsink drive if you're putting this in your motherboard. If you're putting it in your motherboard, don't look at the heatsink versions. Look at the non-heatsink versions, because they will be cheaper and it'll be much easier to install, and you're not actually voiding the warranty because you're taking the heatsink off, which often is the case. For budget end, I highly recommend checking out the Solidigm P41 Plus. That's one of my favorite drives, and also Cardia Z440 if you find them on a good deal because of the terabyte written spec in there. Now, the Samsung 980 Pro, even though being the like a first part of the generation in there, I highly recommend checking these out as well, because often during the holiday season, different times they have awesome deals on, so check them out in there as well. So check out the description below for more information and more tutorials related to this video. But if you're a creator and you want to build yourself the best bang for buck creator PC, then go check out the build guides in the description below. They're completely free, and there is one for each budget. Whatever your budget is, there's one for you there. Thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you soon. Bye bye.